Have you ever wished you could save hours of work in Excel with just a few clicks? I use Excel all the time, and I like to think of Excel as a powerful sports car, but it's one that many people drive in first gear on a narrow bendy road with a low speed limit. For many years, I used Excel in first gear. I'd go to work on my spreadsheets, doing repetitive tasks with the mouse and keyboard over and over again. But it doesn't have to be that way. I'd like to show you how macros and VBA can help you get stuff done much faster. First, what is a macro? Imagine you're the chef of a busy kitchen. You're responsible for everything, prepping, cooking, and cleaning up all by yourself. It's exhausting, isn't it? But what if you had help? Imagine a team of smart little sidekicks called macros. They watch and copy your every move. Once you show them how to do something, they'll remember it forever. They take care of repetitive tasks so you can focus on what matters most, or just relax. That's what macros can do for you in Excel. They record your actions and repeat them perfectly, saving you time and effort. And they're not hard to learn. Let's start with this spreadsheet. It's for the Victor Consulting Company, and it has a list of clients with details on sales forecasts. Now, if I scroll to the bottom, you will see that there is 100 rows. So 100 rows in this sheet. And what I want to do is review this with my team. So I might want to highlight a specific row and then change it to bold, italic, and highlight it orange so it becomes visible. That's fine if I just want to do that one time, but I do this regularly. And what I want to do is to be able to do that on many lines to compare them. I'm going to click on this line, then click on bold, click on italic, click on orange fill color. That was 4 clicks. Every time I want to highlight, I have to click once, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. And yes, you could also use the format painter here. So I'm going to click on the format painter and then format that row, and then click it again and format that row. But the format painter can't undo the highlighting. So if I want to remove the highlighting from here, I've got to select the next row, which is not highlighted, go back to the format painter, and then click on that. Oh, but then let's say I want to change that highlighting. I've got to click on the format painter and then click that line. And so it's not as easy as I want it to be. It's not as quick and smooth. And here's just a simple example. So something that's repetitive is an ideal candidate for using Excel macros. Let me show you a quick way to get started with macros. Up in the Excel ribbon, click on the View tab and then head over to the right where you'll see this group called macros. And we hit that drop down, we get 3 options to view, to record, and to use relative references. I'll explain that later. But the one we want to focus on is this record macro. That's how we record commands as we do them so they can be saved into something called a macro that we can replay later. And just before we start recording the first macro, what we're going to aim to do is record macros to highlight and unhighlight our rows. So the first one is going to change it to bold, italic, and fill the background with orange. Plus, we're going to assign a shortcut, CTRL SHIFT and H. I'll show you how to do all this later. The second one we're going to do is to unhighlight. So remove the bold, remove the italic, and get rid of the background fill. Again, we're going to assign a keyboard shortcut to that, CTRL SHIFT and J. The third thing we're going to do is actually not record a macro. We're going to update the macro code. So macros are recorded using this VBA language, which stands for Visual Basic for Applications. And we're going to do something to make it work on what we've selected, plus the entire row. Fourth, we're going to combine that VBA code that we've updated from both number 1 and number 2, and take that into a new macro, a third macro, that enables us to just toggle on and off the highlighting. So we can then assign that to a button. So with one button click, we're going to be able to highlight and unhighlight either a single row or multiple rows. I'm going to customize this ribbon to make it easier to show how to use macros. So normally the macros group is all the way on the right, but I want to move it somewhere here so it's easier to see what we're doing. To make that happen, anywhere on a blank part of the ribbon, just right click and then click on Customize the ribbon. Now you'll see under View, we have each of the groups, and there's a macro group right at the end. So we click that and then move it up. So it's, let's say, the second one, and then we click OK. And what that does is move that whole group over to the left. Now a quick thing to notice before we start recording is we've got this use relative references. We're going to use relative references when we record these macros, but you might not always want to. So when you record a macro with absolute references, and let's say you're on row 12 in this case, the macro recorder will record that you're on row 12. But if you turn it to relative references, it will say, well, I'm on this row, and whatever row this is, I'll work on that row. And it could be that next time you're on a different row. Whereas with absolute references, it's always going to remember that you recorded it on row 12. Now we want to highlight any row that we're on, so we don't want absolute references. Because if we record with absolute references, it will always record highlighting that same row. So the first thing we're going to do is go up here and select to use relative references. We'll click on that once. And now we can start recording our macro. I have cell A12 selected, as you can see with that green rectangle. I click on this drop down and click on record macro. Now it's going to ask me for a macro name. What I'll do is call it highlight underscore on. Quick word of warning, you can't use spaces in macro names. So instead of a space, I've used this underscore. And we can also apply a shortcut key. So you can either go Control plus a letter or Control and Shift and a letter. I like to go with Control Shift combinations because they're not really used by other Excel shortcuts. Because the shortcut key you assign here is going to override any default Excel shortcut keys. Let's use Control Shift H, H for highlight. And to enter that, you just have to press Shift and H. You don't need to press Control. We want to store the macro in this workbook, so that's fine. We can add a quick description here. Let's say turn on highlighting. Then we click on OK. As soon as we click that OK button, Excel is going to start recording our actions. So here, I'm not going to click anywhere because once you click, Excel thinks you want to remember that click. Instead, I'm going to go up to Home. And instead of selecting this row by clicking on 12 like I did before, I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut, Shift and Space, because that selects the current row. Then I'm going to head up to click on Bold, then on Italic, and change the fill color to this orange. Now I'm happy with that. That's done. Not going to do any other actions except to go back to View and click on this drop down and click on Stop Recording. So it's very important that we stop recording a macro. Otherwise, Excel is just going to keep recording all of our actions and we're going to end up with a humongous macro. So let's click on Stop Recording. Let's test our macro to see if it works. I'm going to click on this cell, Humongous Insurance. Then I'm going to click on the View Macro button. And you see that there's one macro here, which is highlight underscore on. Once I click on the Run button, watch what happens. It highlights that row. And it's not only this button that lets me run the macros, because if you click on Options, you'll remember that we assigned a shortcut key, which is Control Shift and H. So I'm going to close this out. If I move on to, say, the Graphic Design Institute and press Control Shift H, again, it's highlighted. So I can just move down, pressing Control Shift H wherever I want to highlight, and the highlight's done automatically. Let's record our second macro to unhighlight the row. I'm going to select cell A12, and then I'm going to go to the drop down and click Record Macro. Let's change the name. So we're going to call it highlight underscore off to turn off the highlighting. I'm going to assign a shortcut key, Control Shift J, because it's just next to the H. So I'm going to just press Shift and J to make that happen. We'll store this in the workbook, which is fine. And as a description, we'll say turn off highlighting. Now let's click on OK. Remember that Excel is going to record every one of your actions. And so we don't want to click on anything unnecessary. Instead, what we'll do is the same as before. We'll press Shift Space to select the whole row. Head to Home. Click on B to unbold. Click on I for removing the italic. And then select from the drop down to choose No Fill. Now don't click anything else. Just go back to the View tab and click on this drop down here and stop recording. So just like before, we've got a test to see if that macro works. Select cell B14, then click on this View Macros button. We now see two macros. This one says highlight underscore off, and that's the one we just recorded. So I'm going to click on Run, and you'll see it's just removed all the highlighting. And I can also do that by clicking on this row, in this case it's 16, and I'm going to press Control Shift J, and that was a shortcut we assigned, So I just move down a few rows, press CTRL SHIFT J, and then down to this one, press CTRL SHIFT J, and that shortcut runs the macro just as we set up. So the next part of our mission is to create a button that, say, put it in E3, somewhere around here. And when we click that button, it will turn the highlighting on and off for the whole row. In fact, I want it to be able to turn it on and off for multiple rows. But at the moment, it doesn't work that way because if I select these rows and then press CTRL SHIFT H for highlight, it only highlights that first row I've selected. It doesn't highlight all of the rows. So we've got to fix that first. And after we fix that, we can combine the code into a third macro and assign it to a toggle button. How will we fix our macros? Imagine you're back in the kitchen. You have two robots. This one always prepares steaks. The other one always makes salmon. We can give them new abilities by using VBA, which stands for Visual Basic for Applications. VBA is the coding language that lets us rewire our macros and teach them new tricks instead of just doing what they recorded. By editing the VBA code, we can upgrade the first bot to add fries so it can fulfill orders of steak and fries. And we can upgrade the second bot to prepare salmon with vegetables. But what if you need to give them more flexibility, to not just do one task over and over, but change based on what's needed? Let's say our menu has two items. Does the customer ask for steak or salmon? By directly writing the VBA code, we can make a third, smarter bot and have it handle both tasks depending on what the customer asks for. If the customer asks for steak, then our bot can make steak and fries, else it makes salmon and vegetables. Let's get back to Excel. We first are going to upgrade our existing macros to expand their abilities. And then we'll create a third macro with logic to toggle highlighting on and off. Now we'll click on the drop down and click on View Macros. And we're going to edit these macros. So click on this button, Edit. That brings up this new screen, which I'm sure you've not seen before. This is called the Visual Basic Editor. And don't be too put off. What I want you to focus on is just this bit here. In fact, this bit and this bit. So you'll see at the top, it says sub. That stands for sub procedure or subroutine. And it says highlight underscore on. That's the first macro we recorded. Now, just below it, underneath this line, which separates these two macros, so that's macro 1, this is macro 2, we can see that there's the name of the second macro we recorded, which is highlight underscore off. So again, it's called a sub for sub procedure or subroutine. And you can see with the first one, it's got the name plus the description. We gave it a description called turn on highlighting. And for the second one, again, it's got the name highlight underscore off and the description. Plus, it has the keyboard shortcut that we assigned. Now, I want you to focus on just one line, this one here. It says active cell.rows 1 to 1 dot entire row dot select. Now that might look very odd, but don't worry. Instead of this part here, we're going to replace that with the word selection, which you can see down there. If I type in selection and add a dot, that's going to do exactly what we need. Instead of just highlighting the first row in our selection, it highlights every row in our selection. And we move down to the second macro and we'll do the same thing. Just replace this text here with selection. Make sure we spell it right. Selection.entireRow.select. And that's all we need to do. So to head back into Excel, I'm going to press the shortcut key Alt and F11. And that switches us back to Excel. Now, when I select more than one row, I can press CTRL SHIFT H for highlight. That was our shortcut. And all the rows are highlighted. And in fact, I can now press CTRL SHIFT J to remove the highlighting, and it does it for all the rows. So we fixed that problem where it was just highlighting one row or unhighlighting one row. We can now select multiple rows and press CTRL SHIFT H to highlight and CTRL SHIFT J to unhighlight. So now we've done steps 1, 2, and 3. Let's head to step 4, which is combine the VBA code. And we want to create a new macro, a third macro, to toggle on and off the highlighting. So to do that, we'll click on this drop down and click on View Macros. Then we'll just click on Edit. That brings up the Visual Basic Editor, just like before. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here, and I'm going to add a new subroutine. So I'll just type in sub space, and I'll call it highlight underscore toggle. And as soon as I press enter, it creates that end sub for me, so I can see where the macro begins, which is that first line, and ends, which is the second line. And in the middle, let's add some instructions. So instead of recording, what we're now going to do is type out the instructions that we want Excel to follow. In this case, we want a condition. So if active cell dot font dot bold equals false, then what that means is we're going to check if that currently selected active cell has a font that's bold. And in this case, if it's not bold, when it says false, that bold condition is not true. So if it's not bold, that means we want to highlight it. So I'm going to tab here to push the text and start it from inside because it makes it clearer to read later. And I'm going to start this with a comment. So I'm going to start this with a quote mark and a space and type in highlight on, hit return, and you'll see that that turns that line green. What it means is that Excel is going to ignore that line. It's just treating it as a comment for us humans to read, but Excel itself isn't going to do anything with it. So here is where I want to scroll back up and copy this part here, just a bit in the middle of that first macro, and press Ctrl C to copy it, and come back down here, press Ctrl V. Well, I want to rearrange this a little bit, so I'll select the bits that don't line up and I'll press Tab, and this bit which is a bit misaligned, I'll just hit backspace there. And I like to do that because it shows this is one part. Now hit return and return again, then backspace. And it's not just that we want to change the highlighting if it's not highlighted. We also want to turn off the highlighting if it is highlighted. So if the font isn't bold, we're going to turn on the highlighting, but else, we can actually type in the word else and hit return, press tab to line this up, single quote mark to start a comment, and we want to turn the highlight off. So just like before, we're going to scroll up, this time to the second macro we've recorded, and just this part here, press Ctrl C to copy, and I'm going to copy it to the beginning, and then select that again with the mouse, and press Tab until it lines up with the comment. And now we have this first part which turns the highlighting on, and the second part which turns the highlighting off. All we need to do is finish this so that Excel knows not to check anything else and not to do anything else. So we just need to type end if, and that completes our macro, so that highlight underscore toggle comes with this if then statement. And if the font isn't bold, then it's going to turn on the highlighting with that first recorded macro's actions. Otherwise, it's going to turn the highlighting off with the second macro's recorded actions. Let's head back to Excel with Alt and F11. Now we'll click on the drop down to view macros. We'll see now there's 3 macros, including one that says highlight underscore toggle. Let's select that and change the options. I want to give it a shortcut key, and I'll press Shift and K. So when we press the Control Shift K combo, it's going to run this macro. And I'm going to add a quick description, highlight toggle on and off, and click on OK to close that. Now let's test it. I'm going to select this row, or just that cell in fact, then press Ctrl Shift K, and it changes the highlighting. And I press it again, Ctrl Shift K, it removes the highlighting. So rather than having 2 different things, which is highlight and then unhighlight, I'm just using one macro to do both highlighting and unhighlighting, and it should work over multiple cells. So if I press Ctrl Shift K, it highlights all those. If I just want to unhighlight these 2, I press Ctrl Shift K, and it just does those 2. So let's make it even easier by adding a little button here. So we'll go to Insert and click on Shapes and select a rounded rectangle. And I'll place it here, maybe make it a little larger. Then I'll change the shape fill and say make it an orange. But I also want to make it a little bit more exciting, so I'll choose this gradient. And I'll double click inside and change the text to say highlight. But I can't read it, so let's right click this and change that to black. In fact, make it bold and center it. And let's increase the font size. Now it doesn't quite sit right. Let's do that. That looks better. So now I've added that shape. I can right click on it and then click on Assign Macro, which is all the way down here. What I want to do is assign this highlight toggle macro and click on OK. Now, when I'm back here, I can, let's say, select these cells and click on that button, and it toggles the highlighting. So click on cell, highlight, 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 and I want to unhighlight them, so let's toggle that. There we go. So now we have a button that runs the macro whenever we want. And as a final step, you've got to make sure when you recorded a macro or you've added any VBA code to your worksheet, you've got to save it in the right way. Otherwise, you'll lose everything that you've done. So to save it the right way, click on File and then click on Save As. We want to change it. Instead of just an Excel workbook, we want to make it an Excel macro enabled workbook. So click here. When we save it as an Excel macro enabled workbook, it remembers all the macros and VBA that we put in. Now that we've figured out how to highlight rows and properly save our file, let's take it a step further. I'm reviewing these numbers with my team, and we want to look at those rows that have a certainty of less than or equal to 50% so that we can figure out what to do to push those numbers higher. So in Excel, I need to quickly filter the data to list only those rows with a certainty of 50% or less. How do macros help here? First, I'll turn the data into an Excel table so we can add filters. Let's click anywhere inside the data, then click on Insert and click on Table, or press CTRL and T. It's asking me to create the table. I'll just click OK. Then I want to change the formatting so it looks like this. And now I can click on this drop down and choose how to sort or filter the data. I'm going to go to Number Filters and click on Less Than or Equal To, then type in 50% and click OK. So that's filtered this column to show all those rows with less than or equal to 50%. But it's still several clicks and some typing, and I want to do it all in one click. I'm going to rename this table TBL_sales, which stands for Table of Sales. And then I'm going to show you a new menu that makes it easier to work with macros. So just right click anywhere on this empty part of the ribbon, and then click on Customize the ribbon. And now look for where it says Developer. I'm going to check that and then click OK. And what that does is it adds this new tab called Developer. From here we can easily see the macros list. We can record and stop recording a macro. We see the relative references, a new button called Macro Security so we can customize security settings. Now we can record a new macro with this button. I'm going to call it filter_low. And that's because we're going to filter the certainty column for numbers that are less than or equal to 50%. I don't want a shortcut key, and we're going to store the macro in this workbook so it stays with the workbook. Then I'm going to click on OK. Now we'll click on the drop down, just like before, click on Number Filters, and then less than or equal to, and specify 50%, and click OK. So you'll see it's done the filtering, and now I need to make sure I stop recording. So I'll click this button to stop recording. And so this is good, but I also want to filter the data for rows with a certainty of more than 50%. So I've got an idea of which cells are more than 50% likely to happen. So let's record another macro. We'll head up to the Record Macro button. And this time we'll name this filter_high. And we don't need a shortcut key. We'll store it in this workbook and click OK. So back to the drop down. We'll change the number filters so that they are greater than, and then we'll enter 50% and click OK. And that's great, but I also want a way to quickly get rid of the filters without having to click through and clear the filter, because there actually may be other filters, other columns that are filtered. So we're going to record another macro. By the way, I just noticed I forgot to stop recording. So let's first stop recording. Luckily, I didn't actually filter on anything, so the macro didn't remember me filtering. And so that's a good point. When you finish recording a macro, make sure you hit that stop recording button. Otherwise, you might just keep recording more things that you don't want. So let's record another macro. We'll click on Record Macro, and this time we'll call it clear_filters. So we don't want a shortcut for that. We'll just store it in this workbook, click OK. And all we do here is click on this drop down and click on Clear Filter from Certainty. Well, in fact, let's not do that because, as I said before, we might have other columns that are filtered. So in fact, the better way to do this is not clear that single filter, but actually go to the data menu and apply this clear, because this will clear all filters from the table. And now we'll go back to the developer tab and remember to stop recording. Finally, I'm going to add shapes to the worksheet so we can use them to quickly run our macros. Let's head to the insert menu and click on shapes and choose a rounded rectangle. Then I'll click in and design one to put it there. I want to change the text to a white color so it contrasts. Then change the shape to a blue. I might also change it so that it's a gradient. Let me choose this type of gradient. Now let me double click and enter the name. It's going to be less than equals to 50%, but I have to insert the sign over here with a symbol. And it's going to be less than equal to, let's just insert that, close this again, and then write in 50%. So I need to format that a bit. Let me select this text, right clicking, I can choose to center it, maybe make it bold. Oh, I also need to go back to the home menu and then middle align it. That's looking better. So now let me duplicate that with CTRL D and line it up just about here. And this one will be for greater than 50%. And I think I'll have one more to clear it. So I'll CTRL D again and line this up. So I'll use this for clearing the filter. Now I don't quite like having them right next to this, so I'm going to give this a bit of space. I'll click on the first one, shift, and then click on the second one, holding shift down, I'll click on the third one, and I'll move this up to about here. And now we're ready to assign the macros. So we'll right click on the first shape and then click on assign macro down here. And we'll choose filter low. That's the one that does less than or equal to 50%. Then we'll click OK. Then we'll do the same for the second one, right click, and then go down to assign macro. And this time we'll click on filter high and click OK. And finally for the third one, right click there and then click on assign macro. And now we'll click on clear filters and click OK. So I'll just do a quick test to see if it works. I'll click on the first button, less than or equal to 50%. We could clear that. Then click on the second button, greater than 50%, and clear that. Or we could just click the second one first and then the first one second, and you see they work either way. And then clear after we've done. But that's not all. We can do even more with macros because now I want to sort the columns. Let's start by sorting the certainty column from low to high and high to low, so we can see which rows have the lowest and highest numbers. This time we're not going to use relative references because we want to sort on the fixed column that's labeled certainty. So let's go to the developer tab and toggle use relative references off. So we're going to use absolute references instead. Now let's record our first macro. Click on record macro. We'll call this sort underscore low underscore to underscore high. Click OK. And then click on the drop down for certainty, sort smallest to largest, and head back to stop recording. Now let's record the second macro. We're going to call this sort underscore high underscore to underscore low. Click OK. And then we'll do the opposite. We'll sort largest to smallest. And remember, we've got to stop recording. So press this button. Let's add the macros to new shapes on the worksheet. So I'm going to press and hold Control while clicking on these two shapes. Then I'm going to press Control and D to duplicate them. Now I'll move them into a new place, just here, and I'll resize them like so. Let's right click on the first box and click on Edit Text. Now we're going to insert a symbol over here, and we're going to use the arrow that points upwards and click Insert. Then close this. Then we'll right click on the second box and again edit the text, and we'll head back to the Insert menu and go to Symbol. And now we'll click on this other arrow for high to low, so pointing downwards. And we'll click Insert and close this dialog box. And now we need to assign the macros. So right click on the first box, click on Assign Macro. We're going to use macros from this workbook and sort low to high. And then click OK. And do the same for the second box. So we'll right click and assign a macro. And this one is the sort high to low. Then we click OK. Now we can just click on them to run. So that sorts low to high, that sorts high to low. Now it's always important to do real-world testing. So I'm going to filter on client. So we see a list of clients in alphabetical order from A to Z. And now we'll apply a sort. But notice what that's done. Right away there's a problem. I've lost the alphabetical order of the clients. And I don't want that. I want to be able to stack the sort on top of any other filters and sorts that already exist in that table. And there's a quick fix in the VBA code. Let's head to the editor. I'll press Alt and F11. And I've found my macros, this one sort low to high. It's this line that's causing a problem because what it's doing is it's clearing any existing sorts and sort fields. So all I need to do is either delete that by selecting it and pressing backspace or delete, or I can just comment it out using a single quote mark. And then when I click on another line, you see it turns green, which means it's now a comment. I can do the same down here with sort high to low. I'll just comment out this line using a single quote mark at the beginning and clicking somewhere else. And now, instead of clearing any sorts, we just add this specific sort. So we'll head back into Excel with Alt and F11. We'll try this again. We'll go to the client and sort A to Z. Now we'll apply this sort. And you see now it's worked because a datum corporation is still at the top. And we can now have these certainties from 10% all the way up to 90%. I can also sort from client Z to A and then apply high to low. And you'll see the client remains sorted on Z to A and the certainty column is sorted from high to low. Now that's all good, but what if I want to get back to the original order of rows? One thing you need to know about macros is that there's no undo. So we can't go and press Ctrl Z to go back. Instead, we've got to solve this problem another way. Luckily, I've prepared for this by adding a column on the left so that we can sort this by row and we'll get our data back to the original sort order. Let's record a macro. So click on Record Macro. We'll call this reset_sort and click OK. Now we will click on the drop down, sort smallest to largest, and there's one more important step to do, which is go into data and then clear the filter, and that resets everything so we can start sorting again. Now head back to developer and make sure to stop recording. And now we'll assign it to a button. So I'll hold down Control and click on this down arrow, press Ctrl D to duplicate it. We'll reposition this just underneath, and then I'll right click on this button and edit the text and just use a capital R for reset. Click off and then right click again and then assign a macro. So we'll choose reset_sort, click OK. And now we should be able to filter or sort. Let's use this sort and then reset, or sort the other way and then reset. To save even more time, let's create custom sorts that work on several columns so we can click a button and sort many columns at once. Let's record macros to do this. For my first example, we'll sort by client and then category and then forecast amount. So we'll click on Record Macro and then type in sort_custom_1. Click OK. Now we'll head over to data and then click on the sort button here. So we'll sort by client and then we'll add a level, category, and we'll add another level, and this one will be forecast. And instead of smallest to largest, we'll make it largest to smallest. Then click OK. Now we'll stop recording it, go to developer and click on stop recording. For the second example, we're going to record another macro, call this sort_custom_2 and click OK. We'll go back to data and then click on sort. And this time we'll sort by agent and then by category and then by forecast. So we'll click OK and then go back to developer and stop recording. Now we'll record a third macro and we'll call this sort_custom_3. Click OK and go back to the data tab. Click on sort. Here we'll get rid of the agent, delete that level. We'll keep a category. We'll change forecast to weighted forecast and then click on OK. And then remember to go back to developer and stop recording. So let's create a few more buttons. I'll control click and press CTRL D to duplicate. Then move this over just above client. And now Control click and press CTRL D to duplicate. I'll create another one just around agent. And then a third one just above category. Let's rename these. I'll right click and edit the text. This will be sort 1. Let's click here. This will be sort 2. Let's click in the third one and change this to sort 3. And now we can right click and assign the macros. So assign macro, sort, custom 1, click OK. Do the same with this one. Assign macro, sort custom 2, OK. And this one, sort custom 3, OK. Now for convenience, I'll duplicate this reset button by pressing Ctrl D and moving it next to sort. And also I want to get rid of these drop downs because they sometimes block words. So I'll click in the table, go to table design, and then untick the filter button. So now we can read all of these and we can perform our sorts without any issues. And reset like this. Plus we can also highlight rows using the highlight button and unhighlight them like that. You've seen an example of how to use macros to make a simple custom application. And you can make even more powerful applications to automate tasks if you use VBA to enhance your macros. I'd like to tell you about how it's helped with my work. The year was 2011 and I'm waiting nervously outside the door to an office. Inside is the VP of Business Assurance. He's my boss's boss. And I'm holding a stack of papers like a shield. My hands are cold and clammy. My tummy has a tight knot and it just doesn't go away. I've got a very important meeting with the VP, and if it goes badly, I'm afraid I'm going to get fired. So what makes it worse is that the company's board of directors needs that stack of papers for a meeting in less than an hour, but only if the VP's done reviewing them. So I wait for what seems like forever, and I think about how I've been trying to work hard on my Excel skills for the last few months, but I have no idea if this is going to pay off today or if I'm going to lose my job. Finally, the VP gets off the phone and tells me to come in. I lay the papers on his desk and then watch him go through every paragraph and every page. My palms are sweating. This report has to be perfect. And his red pen hovers over the page. He's looking for a letter or number or punctuation mark that is out of place. Will he cross something else? Or am I going to keep my job? Then his computer dings. A director's just emailed a last-minute change. We've got to run the reports again. So I scramble back to my desk. There's only something like 30 minutes left before the meeting. So I open Excel and then click on a couple of buttons to run my macros. They do their stuff and out comes perfectly formatted reports. I send them to the printer and then run back to the VP. He goes through the updated reports. Finally, he finishes reviewing and says, "Good job getting that last-minute change processed." We made it with only 20 minutes to spare. And in that moment, I realized that I'd never have finished in time if it weren't for macros in VBA. That's because they turned a task that would have taken hours into an easy report that's created in minutes with just a few clicks. So macros in VBA are great for automating work in Microsoft Office. But you might be thinking that I'm a special case and just naturally gifted at coding. The truth is, I'm not. In fact, I once tried to learn how to make apps for the iPhone and I gave up in a week. That's because it was just too hard. But the reason I kept going with VBA is first, it is very easy to use, and second, because of a chance encounter. Many years ago, I'm in the open floor office of the HQ of a billion-dollar tech company. I'm staring at this laptop screen. I'm in a meeting with a business analyst and her laptop shows the Excel files that I'm going to take over from her. And everything's fine until she opens the Excel VBA code editor, and then I'm so overwhelmed. It's a ton of code inside and I just don't get any of it. It looks nothing like the Excel that I know and love. But she soon shows me how it saves hours of work every week just by automating data preparation, data formatting, and analysis. And she tells me it's the only way that she can prepare her weekly report in time for the official critical Monday afternoon deadline, the weekly report that's soon going to be my job. And I better hit that deadline every Monday I'm not going to have my job for long, because that weekly report goes to the whole management team, including the CEO and the CFO, and it's got to be ready before their weekly staff meeting on that Monday afternoon. Suddenly, the VBA doesn't look scary. I realize it just looks like a cheat code, something I just really have to learn because it's going to save me so much stress and it's going to let me keep my job. So from that moment on, I dive in and start using VBA to automate my work. And it would never have happened without that chance encounter. The truth is that most Excel users have no idea that VBA even exists, or they see it as something that's just too hard to learn. But I'm here to help you to take that next step and learn VBA for yourself. I spent years figuring out how to teach VBA so there's nothing to stop you. More than 500 Excel users have taken my Excel VBA course, and now they use VBA to automate their work. And that could be you in a few weeks' time. Let me tell you about my student Kenneth. At the start of the course, he didn't know how to use Excel VBA at all, and it's holding him back at work. He needs a way to learn VBA and he wants to learn it fast. And he's worried about just being too hard, like hundreds of others before him have. And that's why I designed my course to take someone who knows the basics of Excel and teach them how to automate workflows with VBA. I split my course into 3 levels. In level 1, just like teaching someone to drive a car, I start with the basics of car control and road awareness. This means recording macros and learning how to use the VB editor to write and edit code. In level 2, we take the car out onto public roads. Just like a learner driver practices to handle road signs and traffic, in Excel, I show you important ways to handle macros in VBA. And in level 3, we jump into the fast lane and turbocharge what you learned in earlier levels. You start to make reports fly out and then automate your work based on the foundations you learned in levels 1 and 2. Now, back to Kenneth. I'm reading my emails at my computer and I see an email from Kenneth. He's just finished the first 5 modules of my course and he's astonished by how much information he's learned. So sometime later, and he's done the whole course and he sent me these emails telling me that he's so happy. Now he knows enough VBA to automate his work and he can write VBA code efficiently and confidently. It's changing the trajectory of his career, and it could change the trajectory of your career or business. Next, read what Minda Treacy says. She's a many-time Excel MVP, which is an award from Microsoft to Excel experts who have shared their expertise with the community. Minda says, Victor's Excel VBA course will have you automating repetitive tasks and skyrocketing your productivity in no time. He makes VBA fun and easy to learn with comprehensive explanations and real-world practice projects that will give you the confidence to tackle any challenge. So if you're ready to transform the way you work in Excel and automate repetitive tasks, check out the link to my online course in the description below. And I hope to see you inside soon.